Baruch Hashem, you're a bad Jew.
Shalom.
Exciting news, this episode is sponsored by Jewish Big Brothers and Big Sisters of LA. Check it out.
So when I hear that people are interested in signing up to be a big, I just want to go give them a hug and tell them it's the best choice you'll ever make. It's the best way to make an impact and to be with someone and trust the process. Know that Jewish Big Brothers, Big Sisters puts it together in a way that it makes an impact for everybody. And that connection for me is everything.
If I had to choose one word of what it was like to have a big, it would be awesome.
Just do it. Sign up for it. Everything that you're going to do is going to be more than you can imagine.
If you want to make an impact on a child's life, Big Brothers and Big Sisters of LA is accepting applications today. Go to jbbbsla.org. That is jbbbsla.org.
You must come in. Please, come on in to another episode of Bad Jew, the place where there is no such thing as a bad Jew. With me today is Rabbi Daniel Sher. Rabbi, welcome to the podcast. How are you today?
I'm doing all right. How are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. Rabbi, we have the right of entry onto the podcast, the 4-minute Bad Jew Challenge, where you tell your life story in 4 minutes on a 4-minute timer. Are you ready?
As ready as I'm going to be. Let's do this.
Love it. It's time shlosh, yalla.
All right. I was born to a home with 2 brothers. I was the youngest, and my experience is often shaped by theirs. So my brothers, Michael and Matthew, and there's 2 important notes about Matthew and Michael. First is that both my brothers are adopted. They are fully and completely my brothers, and I even grew up somewhat disappointed or frustrated that I wasn't adopted. And secondly, Michael is fully blind. We'll get back to those 2 points, but it's worth knowing. I grew up in an immensely identity and pride-based Judaism, something that has always defined a part of my story, but not with a depth of knowledge or tradition. We grew up in Palos Verdes, California, and had a strong, not huge, but strong Jewish community around us. Kids in each one of my classes in public school, and we see people around the city. We kept kosher for Passover only. Shabbat dinner was a random surprise in our home, and I knew prayers like they were songs, but I had no idea what they meant. Now, flash forward to 7th or so grade, my brother Michael, who's the one who's blind, wanted to go to a youth group event. We were part of USY, the conservative movement. Now, the structure of that was home hospitality, which meant that if you went to a synagogue's event, you stayed in someone else's home. So my parents essentially said, one of the brothers need to stay with Michael. This ultimately ends up being a real gift in my life. USY is where I fall in love with Judaism, where I first discovered that Judaism as a religion was simply a communal activity, right? Prayers become cheers, services become schmooze time. I felt this deeper and deeper love. And eventually I end up on the regional board, involved internationally, like really obsessed. Now, you may have noticed, though, that in all those explanations, I'm not talking about God yet. That comes to me when I'm 18. See, it turns out that my brother Michael being blind was actually connected to a series of other health issues, and his kidneys had failed as well. And my parents, no surprise, were not a match. And they started to try to figure out maybe they could trade with another family whose child also had a kidney need, and maybe if everyone rotated given a kidney. And for whatever reason, teen hubris, faith, whatever you want to call it, I was sure I would be a match for my brother. And I was. Now, by the way, the odds of that happening are insane. 1 in a million doesn't even begin to cut it. My brother, who's not biologically related to me, was a perfect match. I was born into a family with a brother who would later in life need a kidney and has now lived for 15 years with that kidney. Now, that situation helped me to understand and find God in numbers, faith in science, and the vastness of Judaism to be a real comfort. Now, in the same time, the transplant, I had met and was seriously dating my now wife, Jen. And our being together through this journey and a lot of others has been really key to the faith as well. Jen has been my thought partner in deciding to go to rabbinical school at HUC in Los Angeles. She has been a supporter of me doing what is theoretically a more odd and less common job, if we're going to be honest. She has been necessary in grounding and giving me those doses of reality over and over again. And so over these years, we've had 3 kids, Levi, Sammy, and Ari, and we live around the corner from the synagogue, Kehillat Israel, in the Palisades, where I have been since I was a 4th-year intern. And I've held 3 different jobs in this community, which is a very real analogy for what a rabbi is. I feel so much of my world has grown up with me And sometimes I actually still can't believe I get the opportunity to translate what I believe to be an incredible tradition.
Wow. Well, Rabbi, you nailed the 4-minute Bad Jew challenge. Well done. Seriously, what a beautiful, passionate story that you have there. I'm really, really inspired by it. And I think the kind of work that you're doing is pretty amazing. And I know that your congregants and those that work with you, including your family, are probably very blessed just to be connected with you. So seriously, that's really, really amazing. So Rabbi, I want to get to the crux of this episode, and that is about psychology. But before we actually do, I have to ask you a question. You brought up in your 4-minute Bad Jew challenge, you talked a little bit about comfort in finding the science within Judaism. And here we are about talking about psychology. So I'd like to know, first of all, what's your experience with psychology, and how did you come to this understanding that you're about to teach us?
So I love Judaism, but it's kind of crazy to think about being a rabbi in college. You're like, what are you talking about? And I couldn't decide. And my dad was a physician. And so I was really interested in psychology and the idea of understanding the way people think and interact in this world. Sociology, psychology, it all kind of blended at that point. And so I started to pursue that, but I really wasn't sure the rabbi thing was going to be right. So I ended up doing a bachelor's of science in psychology, which gave me a very different kind of basis and way of seeing that study of psychology, which ultimately still swayed me back into using that for my love of people and culture and tradition. But that's where that background first stems from. And then between that and just that story and trying to make sense of where rationale and faith meets, I really have felt that they are complementary and not combative, which is unfortunately not the common stance.
That's very moving. And it's true. We have done an episode in the past, by the way, about discovering whether or not God was real from a scientific standpoint. These two rabbis came on and went into depth about that. So I know there's a deep correlation between Judaism and science. It will not be the last episode. These will not be the last episodes that we do that correlate between anything scientific and Judaism. And so let's get into it. I want to learn about this. What does Judaism have to do with psychology, and what is the psychology of Judaism?
So to really understand my viewpoint of psychology of Judaism, everything to me falls back into this little fun word of Torah, right? Like people think of Torah, they think of the scroll, but the reality is small t Torah is a creation of the rabbis. It's this idea that everything we learn, the entire endeavor of our lifelong learning is Torah. All knowledge is Torah. Torah is therefore psychologically relevant because it elevates our endeavor of learning to the same level as the actual sacred text. The rabbis could have picked another word, but by saying you're learning and connecting to Torah, and that being any engagement of learning and connection to our tradition, means that you on this podcast, each week that you learn, you are connecting at the same level as the sacred words themselves. What a boost of confidence, right? What a boost of motivation for the idea of learning, that we should never stop seeking, we should never stop learning, because that is holy. And if you think about it as just black and white, then you will lose that psychological relevance. The grayness of Judaism, the kind of blend, not blurry, but blend of ways of seeing this world is its strength. And the idea behind it, for me at least, is that the text that we do read, whether it be actual Torah or other pieces of sacred text, it doesn't change. The text remains the same. And yet we read it year after year after year. And if you want to see how even crazier that is, do you know how long Torah is?
It's somewhere in the hundreds of thousands of letters, right?
It's actually 79,000 words, which is roughly the length of the first Harry Potter book. I'm not talking number 4. I'm talking number 1.
And you talking about the original scroll, just the scroll itself?
Just the scroll, just the 5 books that we are going to read on repeat throughout the years. Same length as the first Harry Potter book. And yet we break that into 54 sections and we read it with an intensity and a focus. Now, the thing for me is, have you ever thought about Harry Potter? That first cover and the fact that they gave you a visual for what Harry would look like? They all but cast Daniel Radcliffe as the character when the first book comes out. They steal from you this opportunity to imagine exactly what the character would look like. Other things they give to you in that sense, but they give you this cover. What a shame, right? What a shame. Don't give me the book cover. And the problem is Judaism, a lot of times today, for whatever reason, has been co-opted into people thinking they have to visualize Judaism as what someone else says. We've reduced Judaism often, not always, as sound bites and cliches that are formed around our tradition instead of what is supposed to happen, which is same words, new breath. Every time we read them, we take the full scope and context of our life and we pull it into what we're reading. And that is actually what guarantees the relevance of our text.
It's fascinating that you bring up relevance, because one of the very first episodes that we did actually, let me take it back. It was the very first episode of this podcast with Rabbi Benzion Klatsko, right? He came on and we asked about, is Torah relevant today to people, right? And the paradigm shift that he gave us instead in that previous episode was, it's not about whether or not Torah is relevant to us. It's actually about whether or not we are relevant to Torah. And so I thought that was a really interesting kind of framing of the question. But what you're saying is that the interpretation will change based on what's currently happening in your life.
What I'm saying is that Judaism done right empowers the listener, the reader. Judaism is not done to you. As a reader of the text, you're actually a co-creator of the tradition. And if you don't take that part of the job seriously, then you leave on the table so much potential inside of our tradition. Every time you read Torah, you do it in Hevruta. You debate, you wrestle with its words, because the things that we can extract from every week's portion that change each year, it only happens because we are the co-creator. And it's not just there. Our tradition tells us that everywhere. We're in a covenant with God. We're in a divine relationship. Everything has been about relationship and about being a co-creator in this world.
But when you have so many different interpretations of the same text, at what point can you determine whether someone is right or wrong about the way they've taken it? Because listen, there is a way that you can take someone's words and completely morph them and manipulate them into, dare I say, being weaponized. God forbid someone weaponizes the Torah. So how do you know what to follow, essentially?
Well, the question itself has the inherent issue. It isn't a what, right? It's about finding what community you find your voice in. It's about figuring out what part of the grayness that I mentioned, right? Because I know what you're saying is like, if we're not careful, it can be manipulated. But the truth is that the grayness of Judaism also reduces its manipulation. Other faiths that, quite frankly, if we're looking at this from a sales perspective, some other traditions and faiths have done a lot better because they give you something to hold that is not arguable. You look at Christianity, Jesus is the Messiah. Well, what happens when you have to wrestle with that fact? Judaism says, right? Judaism says, God is one. Here's a bunch of names for God. God is one. Here's 70 different attitudes and perspectives and relationships you can hold. God is one. Stop there. Now you, as co-creator, you build your own relationship with the divine. And so, yes, in theory, nefarious actions can happen. But if we as a community consistently engage with it, and we consistently wrestle with its text, and we consistently take laws and use them as the communal discourse and connection, then we've already safeguarded it.
So I love this. I love this approach. I love the way you described it. But the one thing it does remind me of is kind of the stereotype that we give fortune tellers a little bit, right? Some people will pay money to go to a fortune teller, and the fortune teller will look into a little crystal ball, and they will wave their hands up in the air in a nice spooky room, and they will be able to make generalized statements about what your future will be able to hold. Oh, you will consume, you will deal with an incredible challenge, but you will overcome it, right? And then the person on the other end who's listening to the fortune teller will say, yes, that's right, because at work I've been struggling with this, and I'm really hoping that my boss will give me that promotion, right? So obviously there's a difference between the Torah and a fortune teller, right? But I guess what makes the Torah written in such a way that it can have, 70 different names of God, and it can have all these different, I guess I just don't understand how that is even possible when something is written in such a way.
So just remember, we're not talking just capital T Torah. We're talking small t Torah. We're talking all of the engagement of learning in our tradition, right? So
For
if you wanna
the
start-
listeners,
Sure.
can you differentiate between capital T Torah and lowercase T Torah?
Capital T Torah, 5 books of Moses, the scrolls that we adorn and keep in our ark. Lower T Torah is the rest of Bible, all of Mishnah and Talmud, the writings and conversations and arguments the rabbis have about those first books. And it's something fascinating because if you ever look at a page of Talmud, for instance, the middle has a couple lines of Torah, if you're lucky, generally a couple words. And under it, the Mishnah's explanation. And around it, the first Talmudic explanation. And around that is another piece. And you end up seeing an entire conversation in typograph. Because what it's about is what world is sparked by those individual words. And so that small T Torah, that engagement in Jewish ethical learning, when you ask what the difference is between a fortune teller and that learning, it's that there's no cheap trick. This tradition doesn't give you blatant answers for things that happen because the things that happen today are different than things that happened 3,000 years ago. So let's take a step backwards to kind of figure it out. Let's take Shabbat as an instance. The rabbis say that after your week, you need to have Shabbat. They're going to give you 39 prohibitions, things that you can't do, cooking and cleaning and so on. Why? Because they want to make sure you're actually in rest. Not sleep, rest. You don't have enough time to read during the week, read on Shabbat. If you love hiking and you don't get a chance, go on your hike. If you do like a nap, it has to be one of those naps that you wake up a little bit groggy and you're like, oh, I couldn't have done that during the week. It's not productive enough. That's your Shabbos shluff, right? You have to do things that are a balance. Now, doesn't that sound interesting? Work-life balance. Psychology took thousands of years to get to, you need a pause from your everyday. It's not just about sleep, it's about a balance and a regulation. The rabbis are holding that for 2,000 plus years. The psychological relevance of Shabbat is being proven each day now with the way the rest of the world is trying to find a healthy balance to maintain their lifestyle. And the Jewish community is sitting here saying, Shabbat, I sit around the table, I get a little too full. I laugh with my family. I wake up the next morning. I take things a little bit slow, unless you're a rabbi, in which case you're already at shul for Torah study and then for learning and for prayer. But Shabbat is different. It's an island in time, the rabbis say. Well, that's just fancy theological language for work-life balance. So right there, the psychology, the power of our most basic piece. You want to create something in the world, part of creation is rest and recalibration. And we've been doing it the whole time. You want to see another piece, how we approach life cycle, right? We believe that the resilience is joy woven into sadness. So take any life cycle. Take a bar or bat mitzvah, right? Well, psychology today says, do you know how old you are when the brain is fully developed?
I think it's 26 as a man.
Correct. Yes. You can think about this as the Obamacare clause because Obamacare says 26, you're out, right? Like now you got to go on to your own, right? And I always found that fascinating because 13 is the halfway point. And people always say to me, 2,000 years ago, you're considered a man at 13. No chance. Our tradition was agricultural. Do you think they were confused by a 13-year-old pushing a plow or an 18-year-old pushing a plow? It was very obvious that 13 was not an adult yet. But what a 13-year-old isn't is a childing. They're in the process of adultifying. They're the halfway point. And so we have to inspire them to rise up to the level of being a productive member of society. And we have to do that while they're still shaping and growing. Now go to stomping on a glass at a wedding. In this moment of pure joy, pure blissful joy, we're going to break something. We're going to remind the couple that the right now feels like cloud 9. There is going to be brokenness in their world. There has been and will be. And they will be stronger if they approach that brokenness together. There's an emotional intelligence to that life cycle. Shoveling dirt at a funeral. Now we have the words for it, the finality of death. But at the time, it was the last physical act that we did. And if you don't have it, then your mind plays games with you about what was that last act? Did you close that chapter appropriately? Now, we're still going to have Kaddish and the chance to reflect and to remember and to honor, but shoveling the dirt, rolling up your sleeves and literally touching the soil, taking the shovel and dumping it in is a physical act of labor and love that gives us such a powerful reminder for our minds that there's a finality to this, and now we can reshape the relationship moving forward as honor.
So what you're saying is a perfect moment as defined by the Torah is a moment that isn't just perfectly happy, but also has interwoven sadness and reminders of what reality is what you're saying.
I'm saying that true moments in this world, true moments according to our tradition, we don't separate joy and sadness. We recognize the resilience in all of these life cycle moments and the fact that life is blurry. Life is a scale of gray. Black and white is a dream. It's not a reality. And so our text wastes no time with that.
I think that's amazing. And it makes sense because even just like taking, for example, how they say the study Torah is a joy. It's considered a simcha. You're supposed to experience some kind of a simcha to study Torah, right? But if you look at Torah, it's literally filled with arguments of people agreeing with each other, disagreeing in the Gemara and the Mishnah, right?
Yeah.
You have rabbis and sages for over hundreds of years yelling at each other in an aggressive tone, sometimes too, about how wrong they are, and they're kind of pointing at each other in a circular firing squad, right? So it's a joy to experience this, and yet there's a whole fight happening that is a part of our tradition that we experience. It's fascinating.
But the funny part about that is, do you know the very important word that is created and used in Gemara when the fight gets too elevated?
I actually don't know.
It's called teku. Teku. What teku means, let it stand. It means this argument will live to another day. Decompress. We're done for now.
So agree to
And they
disagree.
do this. It's not even just agree to disagree. It's let it stand. Right? Yes, it's agree to disagree, but it's like, this is as it is right now. We'll come back later. Let it stand. Halt. Because they realize the discourse and the argument, the passion that they put into their tradition is powerful, but they're also a community. All of this is the endeavor of community. I would dare go as far as to say that Judaism is a communal experience with a faith expression, right? We are first and foremost community. Then our tradition, our laws, our values, our expressions, our prayers, that's all our discourse. That's all our way of connecting to each other, right? And go back to this notion of God from the beginning. Why image of God? B'Tselem Elohim. Being in the image of God, in my opinion, is a stance on dignity. Because here's the thing. So much of your life is out of your control. Some of your journey, if your parents were divorced when you were a kid, if you struggled with different learning disabilities, whatever it might be, right? Your sexual orientation, your height, your weight, whatever it is, so much of our identity comes down to things that we didn't control. And yet we are whole. We are shalem. We are flawed and we struggle, and that is divine because we're made in the image of God, which means in the image of God is an ability to elevate this dignity because you and your life are divine. If God is everything, God is also the brokenness we know in the world. God is also all the things that we experience. And what a powerful message to send to your whole community that you are divine by being you. Could you imagine how much better the world would be if everyone walked with the confidence, the recognition that they were a reflection of God?
I think it'd be amazing. But the challenge that people sometimes don't like their reflection. In fact, I feel like a lot of the problems that we have in society today are subconsciously created by the fact that people don't like their reflection, who they are.
And the name for Judaism, the name for our people, Yisrael, to wrestle with God, we are going to be okay with the fact that we are not always satisfied with who we are. And we're also going to be okay with the fact that you're allowed sometimes to not be satisfied with God either, to wrestle with your faith, to wrestle with why the world is pouring down on you in a moment of self-pity. All of those things are allowed in our tradition. We have avoided this terrible incident of someone feeling like they aren't worthy of our faith. Yisrael, we wrestle with God. The reason I call that psychology of Torah is because, in my opinion, these things are psychologically relevant to us living a healthy life, being in community, and finding potential. And if we don't realize how brilliantly this was crafted, from Shabbat to the blend of life cycle, to even the fact that Torah allows you to be the illustrator, not even just the illustrator, the co-creator. Our tradition constantly elevates you. That's so powerful that any of us should be doing exactly what you've been doing with the podcast, to learn and learn in a way that shares that learning with others. Judaism is about adding your voice to the community. It's not about shaping your voice to be one that someone else taught you.
And what do you say to Jews that either don't actively learn and don't share what they've learned with the community, and or the Jews that are not confident enough to share that?
Not yet. Our job is to consistently build up this community until everyone is confident enough. And if I had a magic wand, of course, I would want everyone in Torah study. Not because everyone needs to study Torah, but because if you're in Torah study, you are hearing the voices of a whole group inspired by text and inspired by their own thoughts and perspectives and hearts and faith. And that can elevate anyone's confidence to be able to speak. And so that's our job. That's the job of this community. That's the job of our tradition. If we are made in the image of God, if we are divine by simply being us, or at least reflection of the divine, then that means that we have a lot to be working for. It's not about the laws. The laws are a way for us to engage in this. It's not about the holidays. The holidays are a chance for us to gather for this. It's about recognizing the sanctity, the holiness in the connection between two people, in the way our minds work, in the way we can celebrate humanity.
Beautifully said. I think that's amazing. I'm curious though, because so much of what you said is absolutely amazing. The concepts of faith and spirituality, what parts do they play in psychology? And I guess, what is the relationship between being intellectually stimulated versus spiritually stimulated?
So faith and spirituality play a very real part in psychology because our brains are constantly trying to connect to something greater than us. And so when we find the chance to ground that in faith, right? People, a lot of times, they struggle with what is God, for instance. So I often share, we believe in Judaism, God to be the omnis, omnipresent, omnipotent, and omniscient, all powerful, all knowing, and all present. So let me ask you, what do you think there is more of in this world, the known or the unknown?
The unknown.
Okay, which means the most powerful thing in the world, the unknown. Where is the unknown?
I do have a literal answer, but I guess the answer is unknown. It's unclear where the unknown.
So I would say the unknown is everywhere, right?
Okay.
We find out things all the time. We find out that there's sound waves right in front of us. We find out of, disease. When we find out that there's bacteria, the unknown is everywhere.
Right.
And
What
what
I was
are
thinking-
all the answers? Yeah.
Totally. No, I was just going to say what I know is that we know more about space than we do our own oceans. My literal answer was going to be the ocean.
The unknown is in the ocean. And that works too, right? So now you have the most powerful thing in the world is the unknown.
Mhm.
And the all present thing in this world is unknown. And where is all the knowledge left to seek in this world? It's in the unknown, which means that God can be defined as a giant question mark if you need, and it does not affect any of faith to do that.
When you say it like that, sorry, go on.
Yeah, no, please.
I was going to say, when you say it like that, it feels like scientists have made little progress, ultimately.
Or we have to remember that science is the exploration of this beautiful world that we're given in our story, right? That the majority of scientists actually have faith. If you ever look back at the Nobel Prize winners, they're predominantly people of faith that win in the sciences, because science, or they're great, not win, but the sciences are actually an exploration of the unknown and the wonder in this world, which I translate as the gift of God. But now that I don't have to be burdened by what exactly God is, now that I can appreciate that that massive question mark and that unknown is actually comforting, then that's that piece of spirituality that you asked about. It gives you a grounding that allows you to engage in this world in a more whole way.
Wow. Wow. What is something you want people to take with them as a practical way to be more mindful of the Jewish community, of Torah, their place in it, teaching and learning? What are some practical steps that people can take away with them from this episode?
Well, for starters, find community. I know that sounds like a daunting task, but I have never found a Jewish community that wasn't beyond thrilled to welcome you. And it might not be exactly what you expect in a community, and it might not be exactly what you claim you need in that moment. But the reality is that Judaism is about gathering and being in a community and being part of a people. And so that first step is just, that's how we do it. And I know that like we have social media and you can follow different people and you can hear the sound bites and the clips and that's great to feed a little bit, but find something, find people to ground with, right? Find people to have Shabbat dinner with. You don't need to step in tomorrow to being a deep learner of Torah because like I said before, the best phrase that we have is this too is Torah. Any learning, any engagement, any exploration and discovery of the wonder of this world, the rabbis say this too is
Wow. Well, Rabbi, I look forward to living my life, looking at the world around me, reminding myself that this too is Torah. And I want to thank you for being here on the show and giving this really holistic view to everything. Seriously, giving me a lot to think about here, and I wasn't expecting that. Wow, yeah, it's amazing. Rabbi, what is the best way for people to connect with you, follow you, and to learn from you as a whole?
You can always reach out to the synagogue, Kehilat Israel. We're out in the Pacific Palisades. We have Torah study every week on Zoom and in person, as well as finding me either on social media. I believe it's, let's see if I remember it, at Rabbi Daniel Sher. That seems pretty obvious. I believe that's my Instagram, and you can always find and email me as well. Just reach out, connect, because that's the whole endeavor.
Amazing. Rabbi Daniel, thank you for being here on the podcast. And the listeners will see you next Wednesday on the next episode of Bad Jew.
Shalom.